What a great thrill to be joined by a very special guest, Professor Rosa Cafiero of the Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore, the Department of History, Archaeology, and Art History. She is here to talk about her latest book, La didattica del Partimento, a collection of 9 essays revisited and adjourned for the digital era. Professor Cafiero, welcome to the show.
Well, dear Nick Hill, please, I've already been writing to you. Please just call me Rosa. By the way, I'm not a professor with a capital P in the sense that I've been teaching. So I'm an adjunct professor. Okay. I am senior researcher with tenure. So really, please call me Rosa. It makes me feel younger.
Well, actually, firstly, before we begin, is it true that the word for department in Italian is dipartimento?
Perfect. In fact, when you look for partimento without the di at the beginning, you just run into Dipartimento di Scienze and Science Department. You just mix, the word. Yeah, Dipartimento. We could lay lots of jokes you can make about the partimento theory.
That's great. That's wonderful. And actually, you are a graduate of the San Pietro a Majella in Naples. Isn't that correct?
Yes, I am indeed. I'm a graduate in piano, and I'm a graduate at the Naples University Federico II in, let's say, humanities. It's the best translation for my kind of degree. And yeah, that's it. I'm the native speaker. I'm Neapolitan native speaker, besides being Italian native speaker, of course. And I'm Partimento native speaker. I'm joking, of course.
That's right. You really are. And can I ask, was the training that you received there, was it similar in any way to what a student in the 18th century would have received?
Well, that's a wonderful question. As a matter of fact, it was not like that you would receive in the 18th century, more like second half of 19th century, I would say. In the book, I thank my teacher, my composition teacher, because I was trained in composition as well, Bruno Mazzotta. And he's the one I owe this curiosity about why I, together with my mates, were being taught in such, let's say, historical way, in the sense that we use regola dell'ottava, the règle de l'octave, and so many other things which were absolutely non-existent in other conservatories in Italy. So every time I met friends who, for instance, studies in Rome, in Milan, in Florence, in Venice, in Bologna, none of them could just stand the very old-fashioned way we were trained in Naples. So that's one of the points. That's why I started digging and trying to understand why is it so here.
Well, that's interesting, because I remember when I interviewed Professor Sanguinetti, I asked him, is Partimento, did it become extinct? And I think he said something along the lines of it was kind of extinct.
No, actually, yes, Giorgio Sanguinetti is right in the sense that, of course, it was it expired in some ways, but not maybe in Naples, because we just went on making these partimenti fugati, and we had to improvise the scale, and of course improvise with imitation, with what we used to call, for instance, disposizioni, but that is another chapter. So it depends on where you were trained, actually, I suppose.
Did you have to learn partimenti?
No. The question is, we didn't do partimenti. No, not in that sense, because they didn't know, they didn't remember anymore what a partimento was in the 17th, 18th, and 19th century. But they just used this very skeleton of bass lines, which were absolutely not à la page with the way harmony was taught in other conservatories in Italy. That is what I meant. But they had no idea. None of my teachers had the time to get into the library and have a look at the manuscripts, because they had another way of teaching, totally different. That is where and when my curiosity just started.
Can you pinpoint what year it was, or when you got actually interested in digging in deeper into these methods of the old Neapolitan methods?
Well, it was about when I had my first tenure, I had to go to Pavia, that is the university in Cremona, la scuola di filologia musicale, and I had I had a short tenure about esegesi delle fonti musicali, that is musical sources interpretation. It was in 1987-88, and so I decided to have the students practice with some manuscript and some Neapolitan way of posing it. So I just started with this Cotumacci stuff. In fact, the first version of the first essay, La didattica del Partimento, was actually published in 1993, and it came out of the, let's say, workshops made with the students. So that is how it all began.
What was the state of research in this area like in the 20th century? Are there particular scholars who had an interest still in these methods?
Yes, definitely. It all started, let's say, with Carl Gustav Fellerer, who wrote this Der Partimento Spieler. He was just starting from the Santini collection, and he just picked up a couple of partimentos and he had them published. And that was, I suppose, one of the starting point for the 20th century, and because it just pipped into this wonderful collection, which came from Rome, by the way, and so that he is the master, Fellerer, the master of all Partimento scholars, I suppose. And then in the 80s we had Taral Borghir, for instance, who was writing about history of harmony and who had a look at all those manuscripts, and then Friedrich Lippmann and very many others. Yeah, a couple of, they were just starting, my first was in 1993, which is just republished with lots of new things, because in the meantime, in the prefazione, in the introduction, Il Partimento come pratica discorsiva, I just say most of these essays were written in the pre-digital era. But now we are in the digital era, so many things have changed, and it's so easier to find things, and we have wonderful databases such as, the Vantur Uppsala Partimento and Solfeggio, their database. So we really have so many things we can just find from our house and from our computer. Once you really had to go deep and to spend a lot of times in the archives. By the way, this history has to be rewritten once again, because since 2000, all the volumes of the documents of the old conservatories were finally put into a certain order. Since 2002, they are accessible, and they're accessible only one afternoon a week on Wednesdays from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m., thanks to this wonderful lady, my friend, Dr. Tomasina Boccia, who is the archivist. So if you really need and would like to feel how it is, you just have to write to her and go to Naples on Wednesdays. So at present, actually, only those who live in Naples are allowed to. Otherwise, you just spend a week from a Tuesday to a Thursday of the following week, of course. And so that's how it goes. But before then, all the documents were in a big mess. So apart from
what do you mean? So, first of all, how many documents were there?
Thousands.
Wow.
I mean, all those I've been using for all my research are taken from the Archivio di Stato di Napoli, that is the state archive, which means it's the place where you had the copies of everything which was going on in other institutions, such as the schools, such as the conservatories. So since 2002, eventually, all this real material, which is materials and documents which allow us to write the story of the conservatories, are eventually available to consultation and to study. Before, they were just in a huge mess in a room in the library. Now they're at the second floor of the Conservatory of San Pietro, Majella, and they're free to be, by the way, they have been investigated throughout, and there is a very good database which Tomasina Boccia has been texting and realizing. So that is so things have really changed since 1993, quite a good deal.
have scholars looked through all the manuscripts and have they all been understood and cataloged and researched? Or are there still tons of manuscripts with lots of information that need to be looked into?
Well, depending on what you're referring to, because scores, as far as you talk about scores, of course they are catalogued, but not all of them have been properly studied. For example, we still lack a proper study about watermarks, which will allow us to understand exactly, the derivation from one source to another, who owned that, who copied that, and in particular, where was the paper built and made, which is absolutely a very important thing. We still need to do that, and maybe that's the next generation stuff.
Was paper expensive? Were these all written on paper? So even back in those days, these copies were quite precious. And are they mistake-free, or do you find mistakes in these copies?
No, there may be mistakes, of course. Well, it depends. The students at the Conservatory use the cartelle. Sometimes they use these sort of little boards made of leather, and after writing on that, they would just wash it out. So whatever were their exercises, we unfortunately know nothing more about it. Paper was very expensive, but students could start to learn how to write music through copying their friends' exercises, for example. And most of them became copyists for a lifetime. So it was really very, very expensive. So they just started not everything which was written and prepared was actually kept. Also because who would just keep his elementary school or first grade school textbooks? I don't know if you still keep them, but not very many people have. I have nothing left, for instance. So the question is also this one. Why should somebody keep his own exercises? Of course, others keep because they need to understand what was the secret. And there starts the story. And there starts the story of collecting. And there starts the story of writing a history on things about how this magical way of composing was transmitted, basically orally, not always written.
Let's go into the essays, and the first one in the part 1 talks about sulla fortuna. Does that mean luck?
Yeah, in the sense of how many times, but not like in the fortuna in the Latin sense, in the sense of how famous, but how what kind of distribution and circulation this material had. Fortuna, but also luck, of course, in the very wide sense. Yeah.
Right. And we're talking about Carlo Cotumacci. And so this is your first essay, 1993. How did you revise it with new information?
I revised it, adding new manuscript, adding new parts to the textbook of the rules, which is the appendix, and defining some things, little mistakes, I have to confess, which I hadn't properly looked at when the first print came out. And moreover, I tried to go deeper into the fact that this manuscript, which is the main part, the focus of the essay, maybe arrived very, very late at the Conservatorio. I already wrote it in 93, but now I think it is not so more important to use it as a focus, because it was definitely not used by students. It was collected and then it arrived in the library very, very late in the 1870s. So many things have changed since then. But it's still very interesting because, there are some Pasquini stuff, but it has been studied properly, for instance, by Bob Jerdingen. So this manuscript has been studied quite a lot since 1993, luckily.
Very quickly, Carlo Cotumacci, who is he and why is he important? What's his part in the history of this Neapolitan tradition?
Well, it's very funny because Carlo Cotumacci was a sort of a perfect knower. I mean, when you read about the tradition, you just read about Leo, you read about Durante. When I was looking at documents concerning the reconstruction of the school, of the composition school by Giuseppe Sigismondo, that was in the 1810s, 1820s, all the teachers, the surviving teachers, the pupils of the big masters of the 18th century were asked to copy and deposit in the library archive all the materials of the teachers. And then in these documents I read for the first time, so we have students of Leo, we have students of Durante, and we have students of Cotumacci. And so I started digging and asking myself, who was this Carlo Cotumacci? Why didn't anybody, even in the past kind of histories, talk about him? Of course, somebody talked about him, but not in a way as to put him on the same line as Leo and Cotumacci. Actually, Cotumacci was a pupil of Greco, so he went some deeper into what we would say a sort of halfway Leo and Durante tradition. It's as if he opened a third road, a third way, just to say, no, it's very fun, it's very interesting. Just because, so he was just so used. By the way, there's Sigismondo, who's the one who was rebuilding this library and recreating this history, who declares he had been a direct pupil of Cotumacci. And of course, he speaks as an eyewitness and says, okay, he was my master, I can tell you everything about him. But there's something more in the sense that this third road just gave me the way of digging deeper into this. So the first two are all about Cotumacci.
Actually, this third way, I'm intrigued, is how is it different from Leo and Durante?
That's an incredible question. You have to read a forthcoming paper by Van Tour about this. No, because I hope it's Studi Pergolesiani 11, 2020, maybe should be published by the end of the summer. No, I'm joking, of course, but it is a wonderful essay. I've been reading it in proof. He just says that how valuable is this theory of a Cotumacci role in the school? Was it really different? Maybe he was. I'm not going to tell you. You have to read Peter Van Toor's beautiful essay, or even invite him to talk about it.
Yes, I really should. And now on the third essay, we talk about the rules of counterpoint for Nicola Sala. And so that essay, talk about that essay and how you revised it and what was in that essay.
Well, in this essay, I just had to fix things and to focus on the fact that Burney, and by the way, I just forgot to say that Cotumacci was one of the musicians whom Charles Burney met in 1770 and who was described as a beautiful keyboard player, and he was described as being one who played in a very old-fashioned but very complicated way. So he was there, Burney noticed him, and Burney noticed as well the existence of these wonderful volumes, the printed rules of practical counterpoint by Nicola Sala, which were printed in 1794 by the Royal Stamperia, la Stamperia Reale, the royal printers by the Bourbons. And actually it was so intriguing and so interesting. No words, only practical text for fugues. And it was copied by Burney, who desperately wanted them to become a part of his collection. There's a very funny thing I found recently, that at a certain point he was starting copying these regole del contrappunto whom Lord and Lady Bruce had lent him. So he copied and copied and copied, and these copies are at the British Library now. And at the end of the copy he said, oh well, at the end of it, Lord and Lady Bruce just told me, but it was a present, it's for you, why did you copy it? So we have both the copy in the handwriting of the wonderful Burney and the original. As a matter of fact, maybe the original was sold by his daughters they were bequeathed to the daughters. And that's it.
He was considered like an amazing counterpoint teacher, like really one of the best. But was he also criticized for not being a great melody writer?
Maybe yes. We don't know much about how to write melodies as far as this counterpoint stuff is concerned. But, judgments in some cases are very hard to be accepted and to be tested and even proved. Well, Sala, I don't know if you have ever heard some of Sala's productions, Sala's music. It's interesting. It's quite interesting. So I don't know. This is a question. Of course, there's no Leo, but of course it's quite interesting as well.
Interesting. Okay, so let's go on to part 2 now. And part 2 deals with harmonic theories. We talk about Francesco Durante.
Yes. Well, I would just, Fortuna, I'm just thinking about diffusion. Yes, what happens is that at a certain point, this Durante tradition makes a journey from Naples to Paris, and we find that Choron, for the first time, just publishes the rules of not only of Durante, but the rules of accompaniment, and that is why the first trip I've been intrigued by was this Naples Paris, actually this Paris diffusion. In 1804, Choron published together with Vincenzo Fiocchi this wonderful text of L'art de l'accompagnement, quindi sorry for the Italian intersection, yes, the art of accompaniment. So he tried to understand how it was working, and he published it in French.
Did you revise this one? And in what way did you revise this essay?
I just added more musical examples. Yeah, and adjourned the bibliography. I mean, the bibliography is adjourned in all the papers, and so it takes care of all the scholars who have been dealing with the same kind of subjects in between.
Do people get an idea of how hard it was to get at these manuscripts maybe 20 years ago versus today?
I don't know. Maybe yes, maybe no. It's very difficult because at the beginning you couldn't just take digital pictures. Of course, you had to copy not by hand, but you have to take pictures in the ancient way. You have to develop these pictures. You have to take them, and sometimes they were not good. Sometimes you could try to make photocopies, but for instance, you couldn't photocopy prints which had been made before, let's say, 1830, for instance. There were some laws which prohibited the photocopying of this material. So it was really very, very, very difficult, even to have access to that. So you really had to, it was quite difficult. I still have the old photos, by the way. The other way was to microfilm, to have microfilms. But the microfilms were made in negative, in the sense that the white turned out black and vice versa. So you have to read these microfilms as if you were a James Bond, Secret Service.
Yes.
His Majesty's Secret Service inspector. And so you had to use this very huge Microsoft readers. But, you could really do that.
That's how it was,
Yeah, it is. I still have,
You still have them. How many, can you tell how many you had to take?
Thousands.
That's astonishing.
Yes. And they were very expensive, I can assure you.
Wow, unbelievable. Now, let's go on to the second part, Essay 5, Music of a New Kind, Music Composed Without Rules, and you talk about Fenaroli between the 18th and 19th centuries.
Some biography, a very short biography. I live in Bologna since 2002, so I've been studying a lot in Bolognese libraries. One of the best and most formidable of all is the one of the Accademia Filarmonica. The Accademia Filarmonica owns a lot of autographs. Among these autographs, I found these Fedele Fenaroli's letters to his pupil Marco Santucci. So I published them, and that is what this quotation mark is: La musica è di nuova specie. This music is of a new kind. They just compose without rules, is what he says. He was very angry, just writing to his Marco Santucci pupil. Fenaroli just tries to describe what is happening in Naples at the end of the 18th century, at the beginning of the 19th. I mean, the latest letter is about 1813. Fenaroli dies in 1816, and so he just says what has happened in Naples when the only conservatory was kept alive. I mean, the Real Collegio, and he describes what is being taught there later. So he writes to his student, who's now in Lucca or in Camaiore, because he became a Kapellmeister, and so he just narrates what happens in Naples. And in between, he narrates that Emanuele Imbimbo is organizing the new version, the new edition in Paris. So essay 5 and 6 are absolutely linked one to the other.
Yes, and did he complain that there were mistakes in the publication?
Yeah. Exactly, yes. Yes, he said that there were mistakes, but actually, I suppose he was waiting for the Imbimbo new version, and he was complaining maybe with other mistakes. I suppose there were the Choronfiocchi mistakes, but he doesn't say it clearly, because he says there's a pupil of mine, which I suppose was Imbimbo, who was just revising all the mistakes which have been published in Paris, in France. So there were many, maybe. yes.
This is a question that I just have myself. Do we know that they were aware of people like Haydn and Mozart in Naples? I know Rossini was a huge fan of Haydn and Mozart. In Naples, were they aware of these influenced composers? Haydn studied with Porpora, and Mozart went to Italy multiple times. Were they aware of this? Because I guess Italy as a country, there were some troubles with Napoleon and all sorts of things happening at the turn of the 18th century. Were they aware of the European developments?
Well, it depends on the musicians. It depends, of course, on the kind of circulation that a musician had. For instance, don't forget that Ferdinand IV, that is the King of Naples, was very fond of Haydn, and he wanted him to write something for him and to become one of his Kapellmeister. So the fame of this musician was absolutely worldwide. Even in Naples, I mean, they knew what it was about. There were very many people. We know about this. For example, Giuliana Gialdroni has been publishing the correspondence of Hadrava. So most of the politicians knew exactly what kind of music was circulating and were proposing very, very interesting things, even if we don't. I mean, it was a very esoteric circulation, so not everyday's music to be heard, but the circulation was a matter of fact. Yes, it was.
Do we have biographies, like proper biographies of... I know that Florimo wrote a lot of stuff, but people have questioned some of the historical accuracy here and there. But like, for instance, Durante, Fenaroli, all these people, do they have biographies, obituaries, information about their life, or do we only have scraps here and there?
No, there are a lot of them, but they were just written, for instance, by this huge Biografie degli uomini illustri. So most of them were published at the beginning of the 19th century, and most of them had some references to what was told, for instance, by Giuseppe Sigismondo, who was just proclaiming he had been knowing in person very many musicians and was just telling tales. I mean, Florimo, of course, found in his library, because he was the librarian of the Collegio di Musica, he found lots of material. He found what was published mainly. There are not, of course, we don't find handwritten testimonies, of autobiographies, unfortunately. So one of the things which is still very, very interesting is to go through these published biographies and try and see what is true and what isn't, because, the myth is very easily built on narration, so you can really go on and on, try and going back and try to understand who was the first to spread, the kind of misinformation or the right information.
Do we have letters from all of these people sending letters to each other, and do we have collections of letters like Durante?
There are some letters, yes, there's something. Mainly, one of the most interesting letter collection is the one kept at the Museo della Musica in Bologna, because it's the Padre Martini correspondence. So in most cases, we can find some letters which were sent by Martini and to Martini. Of course, in Bologna, we have the ones sent to Martini, unless Martini had written some sort of a copybook of letters, but they're very, very few. So, for instance, one of the Fenaroli letters is in the Museo della Musica, not only in to make up this correspondence, you really have to go through libraries all over, in some cases Europe, but also because in some cases these letters became very interesting objects for collectors. So they would be sold at a very expensive price, of course, I suppose. So in most cases, you just wonder, but how is this letter in Berlin? How is it in Vienna? How did it happen to go there? Because in some cases they were just sold, or just they become part of a collection. It just depends on what kind of destiny, this materials have. Exactly like the scores of Partimento stuff.
Let's go on to Essay 6, which you said was connected to Essay 5, Emmanuel Imbimbo, and we're talking about Paris now.
Yes, we're talking about Paris because Imbimbo was a refugee after the Neapolitan Revolution in 1799, which was the Neapolitan correspondent, let's say, 10 years later of the French Revolution. So many of the intellectuals had to flee, had to escape. So Imbimbo was among them. And this young man was the one who published the first complete edition of Fedele Fenaroli rules. And question is, even if you had these rules printed, because Fenaroli printed them at his own expense in 1775 in Naples, the problem was that you had no musical examples, because the examples were manuscript. And at the end, even Fenaroli just writes in the prints, you can buy these exercises if you go to Mr. Copyist, Mr. Iannoni, or Mr. Hogan, who lives on the first floor in this, and they give
That's hilarious.
Yes, it is. Not for Partimento scholars, unfortunately. No, I'm joking. Because all this material, of course, was available, but it was handwritten. So that's a problem. We find lots of printed material, but only the rules, the words, the texts. The examples have been circulating in a handwritten version. So Imbimbo was the first one who just thought, I have to make money. It's very hard to be a musician, even though an Italian musician in Paris. I have to do something about the Neapolitan school, which is so loved in Paris. So he actually assembled these exercises and just printed the first edition, very beautiful. By the way, devoted to Fedele Fenaroli, and then the Seguito dei Partimenti, devoted also to Zingarelli, who in 1813 had become the headmaster of the Collegio di Musica. And so actually he let's say, joined the text and the musical example, and that is first time.
Now we go into part 3. Essay 7 is music practice. So what would that mean, Practica?
Practica is the practical way of being practical in music, not theoretical. Well, Practica is an important reference because the references I've been finding analyzing a specific manuscript, that it was not attributed to Giordani, has all repertoires stated, but actually it is a transcript of Zarlino. That is, we have the demonstration that Zarlino, that is 16th century theory, was circulating in a sort of modernized version throughout 18th century, which is really interesting and amazing, because everybody had always been saying, no, that must be a Neapolitan kind of counterpoint text. No, this is, okay, the title is Pratica della Musica, but actually, if you really read it and you collate it with other texts, you find out that it is a very easy way of posing Zarlino. So that's the bilancio. The bilancio, that is not a balance, but the way of seeing what was taught as a composition matter in 18th century, of course, maybe in Naples, but also in Rome, because I suppose this manuscript has a lot of things to do with Rome, was actually Zarlino. Let's say a Zarlino modernized for the contemporaries.
Right, and Zarlino was a theorist, but this is practical music.
Yeah, but the amazing thing is that, of course, Practica della Musica is something which you find wherever you have huge theoretician, because, of course, who wants to be only theoretical? Yeah, so I'm a theoretician, but I have to teach you something about being a practical musician. And so, for instance, there's a very nice way of just posing it. Ray, who was a pupil of Sala, just published the rules of Sala, just turning out the title of this huge regole del contrappunto pratico. By the way, regole pratiche, the word pratica is so recurrent, is so often used, because a musician wants to be a practical musician. So you really have to be, not in the sense of practical joke, I mean, but the sense of practical, of evidence, being not a theoretician. Theory frightens, maybe. So a theoretician needs to demonstrate his pupil that before the practice, after the theory, just to paraphrase this, prima la musica, poi le parole, before the music, then the words.
Now we go on to Francesco Bianchi, right? And
Bianchi. We read it chi. Yeah,
Bianchi.
It's funny because in Italian it was Bianchi.
Bianchi. And so, can you talk about his treatise on harmony?
Yeah. Once again, Armonia teorico-pratico, see how recurrent the text is. Yes, Francesco Bianchi is a very interesting musician. He has been one of the best opera musician as far as, the myth of Neapolitan opera is concerned. He was really a huge star. This trattato is kept in London just because he died. Unfortunately, he committed suicide in 1810, and all his materials were scattered. I mean, they were kept by the widow, but they were progressively sold. This essay was renewed quite a lot because a couple of years ago, Boneham, the auctioneer in London, sold another exemplar of this Trattato di Armonia. And so I could just add some new things and some new information because Bianchi has been, focused on newly about this Trattato di Armonia. And moreover, another thing is number 8 and number 9, Bianchi and Selvaggi are once again joined because this manuscript, the manuscript Trattato di Armonia Teorico-Pratico, was definitely in the hands of Gaspare Selvaggi, who used it in the Trattato di Armonia much later in 1823. And actually it was circulating even in the hands of Imbimbo. So we go back to essay number 6, because Imbimbo, in his introductory notes, in particular of the Seguito dei Partimenti, just says that he had been having a look at a certain precious manuscript by Signor Francesco Bianchi, which I suppose was, of course, a part of this Trattato di Armonia. So, there are connections all over the place.
What was in that book? Was that like a Fenaroli regule?
No, it was something much more tied to numbers, in fact, or to the way of dividing octave. to the way of he definitely speaks about tonality, and he tells how, yes, in a certain way, of course, yes, but Bianchi is more, not the Fenaroli is a sort of a pupil of Durante. Bianchi is on the other côté, on the other side. He was a Leo descendant, if we have to, just to create this genealogical tree. So, but it's quite interesting, very interesting, because Francesco Bianchi is always thinking about a mathematical way of posing harmony, and it's very detailed, but in the same way very, very easy. A new thing which came out, for instance, is that Francesco Bianchi was teaching very young children when he was in London, let's say maybe in 1801, 1802. There are letters, and so actually he was also a very devoted teacher to children. So children who had been learning counterpoint, orally counterpoint, and Partimento practice were absolutely very, very skilled. And I suppose that is a kind of witness situation on how this kind of things could be suitable to very young children as well. So Bianchi is a very funny situation, because he's a very high, very difficult to such an extent, because he writes about acoustics, or he writes about numbers, he writes about ratios. The published things of Bianchi are quite difficult to interpret it to a certain extent. But we have the proof, the evidence that he was a very devoted teacher to young children, which is very amazing.
Well, how did he teach young children? Because I know there's things like intablature, which are beginning piano pieces. What was his method for teaching children?
Well, I suppose the description is in many correspondence. And so he was just making them practice even counterpoint on the keyboard.
Ah, I see. And is that much like the Neapolitan method, cadences, the scale, and that sort of thing?
I suppose they are, but I just suppose. Yes.
Okay, so now I want to ask you about what happened to the Neapolitan school, because we know that there was criticism that it was seen as old-fashioned as you were progressing into the 19th century. Why were people so down on the Neapolitan Conservatory? Were they not modern? Were they not up to speed with the latest music?
That's a beautiful question, because if you read Fétis, of course, if you read what Fétis says about Zingarelli, of course, he writes, c'était un événement funeste. It was a deadly happening, having Zingarelli as a director. But we have to remember, for instance, that Zingarelli had been one of the most fashionable opera musicians in Milan, for instance, in Naples and Rome. So Fétis casted a pall, let's say, on Neapolitan beginning of 19th century way of teaching. But we don't have to forget, for instance, that Zingarelli was teaching Bellini. Zingarelli was teaching, of course, the alla page musicians. Of course, when Rossini arrives in Naples, and the Neapolitan years of Rossini go from 1815 to 1822, which is a very interesting period to understand how the teaching of counterpoint and Partimento and harmony at the Collegio di Musica turns out to be. We don't have to forget, for instance, that in 1818, one of the most promising pupils of Zingarelli was Mercadante. So something was moving, of course, something was changing. The huge problem at the beginning of the 19th century was to keep up with what all the prodigious quantity of operatic material had been put on stage, not of course, but as a matter of fact, they were working quite in a, let's say, advanced way. We really have to dig into that, and there are some PhD masters theses at the moment going on about understanding how Zingarelli was writing harmony exercise and in particular solfeggio, because the secret was there. He was a very talented musician, and he taught very talented musicians. So there are scholars who are trying to understand that right now.
These methods, they're still very powerful. So, and I think a lot of people are disappointed in the musical education of the 20th century, where we're dealing with a lot of vertical harmony, Roman numerals, harmonic functions. This is a real breath of fresh air and I would say a more compelling way to learn music.
Well, I was just thinking when you just said the vertical harmony, the question is that even if you have a look of how pupils in the Neapolitan Conservatorio make the realization of this exercises. Let's not call them partimenti, let's call them bases, which is quite easier. The more you get far from the original model, the more you have verticality. I mean, the original model, the original Partimento, was a fine mixture of counterpoint and harmony. The children weren't really thinking of dividing them. So the fact that you have to imitate properly a singer, you have to accompany a singer, you have to accompany an instrument, you had to invent your disposizioni. Disposizioni was a technique basically of counterpoint. So you had very small ideas and you had to combine them on the keyboard. So actually, I suppose one of the most beautiful moments to see how they were working all together is the first half of the 18th century, or even the latest part of the 17th. The more you go any further, the more you find that this imitation based harmony turns to be a vertical harmony. It's the way maybe harmony is being taught nowadays as well in Italian conservatories, because you go far from the model. So the more you get away far from the model, the more you are alone. So you don't know. Also because
what do you mean by alone, Rosa?
Alone in the sense that when the Partimento Spieler, in the sense of Gaetano Greco, for instance, knew exactly how to do that. Also because the live music, the music alive, which was made, which was heard in the theaters, which was heard in the churches, which was heard in Accademie, corresponded exactly to what they were taught. The more you go towards 19th century, the more you find that music on stage has been changing. The more you go, of course, towards the 20th century, the more you have to feel the need to understand that Partimento is an old-fashioned model, and it is no more alive. The sense of alive is what, for example, Stendhal says when he writes about music in Italy. He says, every night I go to theater and every night I listen to something lively, living, because it is being created exactly for that event, for the stage. And exactly what I mean, in the sense that a Partimento Spieler in the 18th century knew exactly that that kind of improvising, that kind of harmonizing, that kind of counterpoint invention was to be found in sacred music, in operatic music, in instrumental music. It was alive, really alive. And the better you would learn, the better a musician you would be.
Is harmony and counterpoint, are they two separate subjects, and should we separate them?
Well, it depends on what you want to do with them. Because, if you want to be a Partimento Spieler, maybe you shouldn't. If you want to be, I don't think for example, even if you study Cherubini, even if you study, it depends on how you want to look at it and what you really want to understand of it. I would really look at them in a conjunct way. Now there's an adjective which is very, very much used and abused in present days, holistic. I don't know if it's the proper way of using that. The question is that you have to study and go on, because every moment of our history maybe has a different way of posing relationship between harmony and counterpoint.
Is this music only for the 18th century, or do you feel like if someone is learning the rule of the octave today, cadences, can that apply to more, can the principles of this instruction, can that apply to more modern settings?
That's a wonderful, it depends on what modern settings means, because what kind of a composer would you like to be if you start for Partimento? I don't think I'm the right person to answer because, my view is maybe it's too much history based. I mean, the question is, I would think it is useful because in this way you could understand music without boundaries and without chronological limits. But of course, it just attains to a repertoire which may exclude the Renaissance, of course, and maybe, of course, electronic music, maybe. But it's so. But really, it's so difficult for me to answer. Really,
No
so
problem.
difficult.
Well, I mean, could you talk about what mysteries that you are interested in, that you're looking forward to reading about, uncovering yourself, or curious about?
Well, mysteries. Well, very curious. I would like to find some more exercises realized by students. Recently, even Van Tour knows about it. There's this beautiful situation about an unknown musician whose name is Biagio Muscogiuri, never heard. Besides, in two manuscripts, one in Florence and one in Bologna, again in the Accademia Filarmonica. It is one of the few, not the only one, or the few cases in which we have exercises realized under the hand, we can say, of the pupil and correction of the teacher, which is something I really long to find and long to see, because I've always been wondering, but what did they do exactly? How were they corrected? And in which way would the teacher just describe and the error? The theory of mistake is one of the most interesting theories in general. Even when you learn a language, when you learn maths, it's important to understand where the pupil fails and why he fails, and what if a failure gives you something, a new theorem you don't know. So that is what I like to find, in the next few years. I don't know. Really.
Do you have a favorite composer from this period?
Oh, well, all of them. No, it's so difficult. I adore Leo, of course. And it's difficult to talk about Fenaroli. Fenaroli has been writing very beautiful music, mostly church music. The things I've been reading, of course, and the scores I like quite a lot. Durante is amazing, of course. No, they're all, it's a nice group. It's a nice band. It's a nice team. It's so difficult to choose, among flowers. I mean, they're so interesting, really so interesting. And for instance, even there's a scholar who plays a lot but doesn't write much, unfortunately, who is a Leo scholar, who says that he just believes that most of these partimentos were taken from Leo's sacred operas, and they were just parti cavate. They were taken out because students would need to improve, and that was a beautiful thing. So in most cases, maybe we don't have original partimentos. Maybe we still have no clues because we haven't been studying properly sacred music of the period. There's so much to do yet. So we just know, the surface of the iceberg. We have to go deeper and deeper and deeper and try to understand exactly what part of the composition could become a subject to use for a student to improve a technique. And so there's so much to do for lots and lots of generations.
And my final question is, what's your reaction to the really incredible interest in Partimento and solfeggio?
I'm amazed. Amazed, simply amazed.
That's it. And
it's beautiful.
Can you see a big difference for your first article in 1993 and today?
In which sense? In the panorama?
In popularity, yeah.
Oh, well, of course. By then, nobody would just give a cent to that work. I mean, because but what the hell have you found? What is this boring thing? And what you just go on? No, nobody told me actually this, but they were thinking that. No.
They were thinking it. Well, I mean, I would imagine there was skepticism, and obviously classical improvisation was not something that many people did. So do you find that among colleagues and peers, there's more renewed interest in this field?
Yes, I think so. I hope so. And there's so much to do. I mean, the beautiful thing is that everybody just feels free to use a different lens. I mean, everybody has to look at partimento and I mean, but partimento is just a very tiny part of the compositional skill. So you really maybe in this the holistic help maybe be useful in the sense that we need to always to have a look at the overall situation. I mean, the Partimento was written maybe to join the chant, I mean, to join the singing line. And a singing line couldn't live without a bass. So we really have to think and to change dresses and to wear the dresses of the scholars and the students in the conservatoires or even in private tuition, because there's something which we still are missing, the private tuition, because in most archives, and I think we're going to find some more and more things of noble learning composition, just as a lark, just as a joke, but with very, very important and talented musicians. So there's so much to do.
Great. Well, Rosa, it was really a pleasure to talk to you. I feel like I'm talking to Partimento royalty, someone who's been there from the beginning.
No, actually,
someone who's been there from the beginning and also really contributed so much to this research. And I thank you for everything. And because
no, I thank you. In Naples, we use an expression, onore e piacere. In a very quick translation, it is honor and pleasure, in the sense that I'm honored and the pleasure is really
that's a great expression. No, that's a great expression.
Yes, honor and pleasure is quite a nice one. So, thank you, Nikhil, for devoting me your time, and really thank you for hosting me. It was really an honor and a pleasure.
Well, when the book is published and let's come on again and let's keep going, because
it is published.
Oh, it is published. Is the English version coming out?
Well, it depends on English publishers or American publishers. We have to see. I don't know. Well, I'm not a chauvinist, absolutely, because I've been trained to English since I was 9, and to French and German and some other languages. But the fact is that I love Italian, and I think that there are some concepts that have to be expressed in mother tongue, and I really do believe. Because even when you read, all these notebooks by Neapolitan musicians, you have to feel and to go deep into the very curious and funny, and in some cases illiterate expressions they were using, and you may be amazed by that. So then the other languages come after.
Okay, Rosa, it was really a great honor. Thank you so much, and I hope to talk to you soon.
My honor again, and bye-bye. I hope to see you in the flesh. Why not?